So thanks so much. If you are joining Josh and I, this is being recorded, so this is your final warning. But please use the raise hand feature if questions pop up. Sweet. Well, thank you, Josh, for joining this. I don't know exactly what I'm going to call it eventually, but I'm going to call it Josh Talks Untraditional Media. So,
yes, that sounds great.
Influencers, podcasts, all that kind of good stuff. Yeah, would you mind, just as we start off here, kind of giving some 30 seconds about your brief background, or not your brief background, a brief background about yourself. We'll call it that.
That sounds great, Thomas. Yeah, for those who don't know me, I'm Josh Valencia, and I got started in this world of marketing at this little place in Boise called ClickBank. And that was back in the 2010, 2011, starting in the customer service team. From there, I got exposed to all the good stuff and was on the sales side with this man right here, with Thomas, for a good while there. So got to work with Thomas and a handful of other rock star folks at ClickBank. And about 4.5 years ago, jumped ship and went over to Organifi. While I was at ClickBank, I had the privilege of working with Organifi and launching their first ever affiliate program on ClickBank, which was actually the first affiliate launch for a physical product or a consumable product on ClickBank. So that was, I guess, my claim to fame while I was there. I got to be a part of that, which is pretty rad. Since then, I've primarily focused on the partnerships components to Organifi, a little bit of CRO and funnel development for the company over the last 4.5 years, but primarily focused on partnerships. That went from focusing in the world of direct response email marketers to influencers, podcasters, and other various partnership channels we've been exposed to over the last few years. That's kind of where I've cut my teeth in this world, Thomas.
Awesome. No, I was super excited to have you on because you've got that great background of affiliates, which a lot of, kind of our base and network understands to a pretty strong degree. But then you can really go into how you've pivoted and really kind of grown into additional channels. And so as we kind of start talking about influencers, podcasts, kind of different forms of media that you've been growing Organifi into, I'm just curious on your take on kind of why did, I guess, you and Organifi grow into influencers and kind of and podcasts, I guess, too, in the first place? Why did you want to explore that route versus going deeper into other channels?
Yeah, as I mentioned, when we launched on ClickBank, that was our first foray into partnerships. And fortunately, we were able to grow relatively quickly due to the support on the ClickBank side, but also the affiliates we got to work with, like Tyler Bramlett, Scott Rewick, and Chris Clark, and the Jeff Radich and Mark Stockman. Those are kind of I'd say like the main guys that kind of helped catapult Organifi from kind of being this small fish product to becoming this 6-7 figure a month entity in the supplement space. So yeah, key affiliates helped us get there. And then the next evolutionary step, if you were to ask Jamel, he moved on to ClickBank. That was a home run for us. And the next phase of evolution, as he went to these events, conferences, speaking with other entrepreneurs, these other folks are telling him, you got to check out Shopify. And this was back in like 2016. And so Shopify was relatively new back in 2016 for our world. And so we made the pivot, and from there, it was kind of that next J curve for the company to get us to another level. At that point, as we started focusing more on brand building and building an traditional e-commerce experience rather than one-off funnels, which we had been doing for so long, it made a lot more sense to focus on partners that were not only driving revenue, but also driving like brand equity, so to speak, brand value, adding value to our brand by creating content that was going to stay in existence, for years. If they launch a post on Instagram or a blog post, etc., that's going to be content that's going to support Organifi for the foreseeable future. And so it made a lot more sense to work with podcasters, work with other, we'll call them content creators, as affiliates, because they were all contributing individually to the Organifi brand, and in turn we were paying them commission for that.
Oh, that makes a ton of sense. I never really considered the evergreen approach to it, right? It's kind of sticky content that's out there forever.
Yeah, and it's really like a borrowed trust that comes from these influencers. In the world of direct response, most emails that we operate in are very curiosity driven, using claims to help people who are in need. On the flip side, if you look at folks who have established themselves a community that's active and engaged and listens to that influencer as an expert, we don't have to worry about convincing the customer that we're a trustworthy company because we're borrowing that trust from these influencers. And so they're just letting us kind of ride on those coattails, and in turn they get paid.
That makes a ton of sense. And just to clarify everybody, what is an influencer to you when you're looking at
Ooh,
that
yeah,
landscape?
an influencer for me is a content creator that has an established audience that looks to them as an expert or authority in some vertical, if you want to call it, some niche, some topic. For us, it's usually wellness, but in personal development as a whole is actually pretty advantageous for us.
And then, so do you like specify a certain type of platform? Like I know Instagram is kind of like the one that people look at for quote unquote, I'm an influencer, but is that
Yeah, they created that, didn't they? That's all Instagram. Yeah, fair question. It is still kind of that for us anyway. I'm sure it's different for other companies and the demographic you're targeting. For us, Instagram is still king for content creation and traffic. TikTok is slowly growing, and we still do a ton on TikTok. Yeah, wouldn't classify influencers as being, beholden to one specific platform or your channel. The top influencers have multiple channels. They might have a podcast as well as a newsletter along with their social media account that gets hundreds of thousands of followers.
Okay, so when you're looking at the landscape of influence, I don't know what else to call it, outside of say paid media and email, so is it mainly social channels, podcasts, and then is there any other kind of untraditional type of thing that you're looking into media buying for, or kind of influencer type promos?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's something that we're focusing on a lot more. And Thomas, you and I were chatting before this meeting, before connecting here on this call. One of our main goals at Organifi, we've been doing influencer affiliate marketing is kind of a hybrid for years. And only now are we really dialing in on, okay, we have this one partner, they're performing really well on Instagram with their stories, but they also have this blog. And because they have this blog, they have this newsletter, 20,000 people. Why are we not creating a deal with them where we're capitalizing on every channel? And that's what's really cool about the world of influencers is the really established ones that know what they're doing, that are business minded or have a partner that's involved in the business side. Like they're able to leverage multiple channels, and as a brand partner, in turn, we get to do that as well.
I was going to dovetail into that. Like, how do you actually go? Can we maybe go back to when you were like going to start this campaign? I don't know if this was it 2019, 2020 for you, and you really started doing this?
For me, it was primarily last year. We started it in 2019 a bit. I really got to dive into it last year, though.
So how did you start cutting your teeth in that? Like if you were someone, on this call wondering, okay, how do I actually start finding influencers and kind of start branching out into that? Like, how do you even get going with that?
Yeah, a couple ways. For starters, as I think anybody in the world of direct response will already know, and it all comes down to your relationships. And there are a lot of folks in this industry that we're all tied to that have those connections to influencers, and even some that you may not know them directly, but the influencer world is like adjacent to the direct response world. There's so many direct ties and indirect ties
can we explore that a little bit? That was one of those questions I had on my notepad. Like, what are some of the similarities that you've found with working with affiliates? And then what are some of the big differences you found working between the two?
Yeah, that's a great question, Thomas. Similarities, I'd say, similarities. It's easier to start with the differences. Let's start with the differences.
Yeah, let's just
because then we'll jump into similarities. So the differences that I've seen between the two, and I classify them, I have calls like this pretty regularly. When you look at the world of affiliates and the world I came from in ClickBank, relationships is number one, because you don't want to do business with somebody that you don't trust, that you don't have an established rapport with. But at the same time, a close number two is the ROI. Like, what are the returns you're getting on promoting an offer? What are your earnings, EPM, or whatever your metric is? That's like your hero metric, your hero KPI. And so, yeah, you want to continue to do business with the people that you love, but the money is what keeps the wheels on the track. So, in the world of influencers, it doesn't necessarily align. Like it's fairly different, because more important than anything, they want to know that the product that they're endorsing is going to make a positive impact on their audience. And admittedly, in the direct response world, I don't think we all do a ton of vetting. I'm sure there's some companies out there that are like uphold themselves to high standards. Like, we're not going to promote this even if it outperforms anything else we've run. But not everybody does. In the world of influencers, that's king, because their reputation, their brand, their business, it depends on them entirely. And so as soon as if they lose credibility to their audience, their business is cold. It's dead in the water. And they can't do anything else. And so they're pretty religious with, most of them are pretty religious with making sure their products align with their brand, with who they are, and that is going to be an advantage of benefit to their audience. So that's a key difference. With that,
oh, sorry, I was going to ask, digging into that a little bit, do you need to have a brand yourself? The brand versus direct response, kind of, right? The offer versus brand argument you hear thrown around the industry. And do you need a good-looking brand, or does it just kind of have to be the right type of offer and product?
It really depends on the influencer. I'm going to lean a little more towards establishing a brand matters, because if you have a brand, I mean, if you want to start classifying what the difference is between an offer and a brand, I mean, that's another like deep conversation that I think is a lot more, at least for me, it's more philosophical.
I guess what you're kind of asking is, like, can you take someone with an aggressive direct response offer?
Yeah.
They can have success with quote unquote influencers, or do they need to have something that looks a little more polished, maybe, unless, you know, as an influencer to be scared away by someone with a big VSL or long form sales lander?
Yeah, oftentimes, good question, Thomas. I'll ask when I get into these conversations for folks in the D2C space, so direct to consumer brands and whatnot. Like, very few people know what a VSL is. They very, very seldom know what a long form sales letter is. Even a handful of these brands that I would say are like direct response adjacent, like Kettle and Fire, who do bone broth, Keon, which is Ben Greenfield's supplements and wellness brand. They've dabbled recently in the direct response space. Magic Spoon is another one I think is a great example, where they have spun up long form sales letters because they see the opportunity. But generally speaking, it does tend to turn off influencers. They also generally don't know that world at all. So I would say that I think you can do well with an offer in the influencer space if you have like a greater like mission or purpose behind it. And it isn't that you're doing it to sell, you're doing it because it is genuinely a part of your identity as what you're trying to do as an entrepreneur. So I mean, Organifi, I don't think we would have made the transition to influencers, podcasts, etc., if we hadn't established ourselves a brand. Because 5 years ago, we were running a 45, 50-minute VSL that was all about fat loss and green juice. And that probably wouldn't fly with our podcast partners today.
Gotcha. That makes a ton of sense. Okay. Hey, Jeannie, I'm going to regret this, but I'm going to give you the mic here for a sec to ask Josh a question. Let me unmute you.
We're going to talk for the next 40 minutes, Thomas.
I knew you had muted me, because all of a sudden I couldn't talk. Say, hey, Josh, I love you, miss you.
Hey,
we'll talk later.
Yes.
But I actually have questions about what you're talking about, because it's a very interesting topic, and a topic that a lot of people say they're going to tap, but they can't really tap it properly. So in your case, you guys have a well brand and everything, but when you guys started, how do you guys approach your influencers, and what type of deals do you do that will trigger them wanting to promote the product? Because like you said, they're triggered for different things. Some is money, some is brand. Like, how do you do to get that influence to pay attention to your offer when they have $1 million that they get and stick with it? And then I have more questions about it, but I'm going to be good. And please mute me back, and I'll ask my question if you don't answer with the answer. Love you, Thomas.
Thanks, Jeannie.
Thank you, Jeannie. I love seeing James laughing in Spanish. I can hear the Spanish laughter, James. Well done. That's a great question, Jeannie, and it brought back what Thomas and I were talking about earlier until I derailed it. I was mentioning relationships earlier, and I brought it up because that's really how we got started. If you look at our top partners that we've been worked with for 3-4 years in the world of podcasts and affiliates that are in the influencer world, it came down to Drew having a direct connection to them. So Drew Canoli, one of our founders, everybody knows his face because he's been on YouTube, plastered on YouTube and Facebook for the last 5 years. He's been able to open doors and really establish a relationship even before business is discussed. So I'll give you 2 examples. Ben Greenfield, who we've been working with for, I want to say 3 years now in the podcast world, and has generated hundreds of thousands of dollars for us in revenue because he's the man. He and Drew used to do regular videos segments on YouTube here and there because they just click so well. Another example is a woman by the name of Shailene Johnson, who is just an incredible entrepreneur and just is so dialed in with her audience. And Drew was able to open that door simply because they had connected and shared some time in Sedona together, and that immediately broke down the wall. So to answer that question, Jeannie, about getting started, that's really what it came down to for them. And everybody in this industry knows, like, relationships do matter. And even in the world of influencers, experts, et cetera, it does too. And then to answer the second component of like offers and deals, I've learned in the last year and a half or so that it varies depending on the influencer. And I say that because some influencers are totally cool with getting a 25, 30% commission. And for those of you out there in the direct response world who have yet to dabble in influencers, that may blow your mind, because like 75% commission is pretty standard. Thomas, I'm sure you know of many who are offering like 90 to 100% commissions.
Yep.
And you can create real value with these folks at a 20% commission standard, and they'll love it, because Amazon fortunately set a standard of making 5 to 7% commissions. Granted, their conversion rates are through the roof because everybody buys through Amazon. But offering a 20, 30% commission is generally pretty acceptable. And I'll say that as well, that conversion rates are going to be vastly different between the world of direct response and influencers, because it's the difference between warm and cold traffic. Similar to running a cold ad campaign on Facebook versus running your top affiliate running the same offer to their list. They're going to be two different conversion rates. Similarly, with an influencer who has an established rapport with their audience, you're going to see 3 to 7 to 8 to 10% conversion rates on an offer that's like lowest cost to customer, $60, $70, which is just pretty phenomenal. And so, yeah, you're willing to pay out 20 to 30%, even when they're going to bring customers. Your customers are going to come back. They're going to buy from you repeatedly. You're going to pay them 20 to 30% commissions every time. And that's a pretty good deal, especially for folks who are coming from the world of direct response.
So on the flip side of that, the con I hear a lot about influencers is like, oh, they overvalue themselves. They charge a bunch for, they charge 10 grand for a story and there's no guarantee. Like where's that gap between, hey, they'll take 20 to 30% and get a bunch of value from it, and then that flip side where you hear people like, oh, don't worry, don't do influencers. It's just, you'll just burn a bunch of CPM and there's no guarantee of any results.
Yeah, you're totally right. And it happens a lot to us still, when you work with smaller influencers, they're generally going to be more accustomed to making 20 to 30% commissions. So somebody who has...
Can you clarify what a smaller influencer is?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've classified them as like a lower tier, we'll call them like a micro influencer, below like a following of 20 to 30,000. A mid-tier for us would be 30 to 80, and then 80 and above we'd consider a large. Now you can mess with that a bit. Anybody over, I think, in a 6-figure following is going to feel a little more entitled. There's definitely like a threshold there, and thus might inflate or overvalue themselves. And they're also the ones that start brokering agency deals, or an agency will bring them under their wing, and then the cost goes through the roof because agencies are going to tack on their fees. So what I will say is that I would counsel anybody getting into influencer marketing that don't devalue the little guys, because they're multiple steps closer to their audience than somebody who has a following of 1 million. Because of that, there's a lot more of an established trust with their audience, and as such, you're going to see those results in performance. We have like podcasters, for example, that are a relatively small podcast. They're not Joe Rogan, for example. They're not even one of our partners, like Ben Greenfield, we already mentioned. Not even to that level, but they're bringing in you can wrap your head around like a 30 to 1 return on ad spend on podcasts. We see that on occasion with partners, even though they might have a Instagram following of 10,000 people, and a podcast that only gets downloaded 20,000 times a month. There's the rev share component of offers with influencers, but more often than not, you're going to run into flat rate requests, not even requests, but demands, essentially, like their requirements. So when you're asking Jeannie, rev share, flat rate, like what's the options here? More often than not, unless you have an established relationship, folks are going to be asking for a flat rate deal. And that's really what Thomas is alluding to, is a lot of folks are worried about just burning through a CPM cost because they're not getting any value. And so I spent last year, I opened up like a new campaign for paid influencers, and our thresholds were relatively tame. Like we wanted a 1-to-1 return on our influencer program, looking at it from an acquisition standpoint. And we were able to hit about $80,000 a month in about 5-6 months, just focus on that. So to give you kind of some context of what is possible. We tested 70 influencers maybe to get there. And I haven't looked at the spreadsheet in a while, but I would say 10% of those were like gangbusters successful. And maybe 20% of them were like a solid, like 1 to 2 to 1 ROAS. And then the majority of them were like a loss. They were a loss. They were a straight up loss, but blending them all together, we still hit the 1 to 1.
Gotcha. Yeah, it feels like you almost have to treat it like CPM email buys, right? Where some
very similar, yeah.
Yeah, they're going to tank. They're not going to do well. Other sends are going to do great, right? And those ones that do great are going to float the rest and give you the ability to test and kind of find that next time in the rough.
I agree, Thomas. And adding to that, one advantage that I would say direct response marketers have, if they were to really like grab the brand bull by the horns and like dive into the world of influencer marketing, like you already understand offer testing. You understand that, like, what are the main components to a winning sales page? You're not just going to throw something out there and tell all your affiliate friends to promote it. You're going to test the hook, you're going to the angle, the offer, the pricing. And something that doesn't get tested very often in the influencer world, from my experience, is the offer itself. What are you willing to work with an influencer over the course of 2 to 3 months to see like what offer is somebody going to click on to drive revenue and customers?
Thank you. And then Josh, I'll ask Chelsea's question here. Where'd that go? So she was wanting to ask how can you approach specific groups of affiliates, or excuse me, influencers? Gosh, I need to put my
it looks like based on vertical niche, etc.
Yeah, she was looking. How do you? Sorry, chat's going all over the place. What's the best way to find a specific pocket of new influencers, i.e., preppers or far right, or kind of insert any other pocket that you will? Like,
yeah, it's a great question, Chelsea. So what we've done, we use an app, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it unless you're willing to really commit some dollars. It's called Grin, and Grin is a full CRM for influencers. They're a cool startup. I can't remember the basic, but they're an awesome team, always building, always improving their platform. And one of their features is the ability to plug in an influencer and look at their engagement rate, look at their audience, all these various performance metrics that direct response marketer would love. And then from there, you can start looking for affiliate or influencer lookalikes. So if you have one or two that you know are like great fits for you, now you can take those and go look for influencer lookalikes based on a bunch of different variables that you can filter with. So you want to look at an influencer between like 40,000 to 100,000 followers who are like this account, who's a prepper, for example, and they have an engagement rate over 2%, and they live in the US. And so you can focus and dial all of those in with this app. Now, granted, like I said, Grin is super expensive if you just want to use that. It's a great platform, but it's 5 figures a year to run it. However, there are other tools that do something similar. I haven't used this one in a while, but it's called Strawberry Socials, and I connected with the founder of it a year ago or so, and really cool tool, and it does just that. I want to say it's like $40 a month. It might not be even that. It might be a little more. But I use that to start until they started using our tool.
Say that again. Strawberry Socials.
It does exactly that. Lookalike. StrawberrySocials.com.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's a great way to do it. Once you know one person, I think it kind of lets you into the door with everybody else. Listening to podcasts as well. Like if you can identify a podcast that caters to your audience, even if you don't know who the influencers are, go on their Reddit, go on to Facebook groups and see, like, are they listening to podcasts? What email newsletters are they belonging to see who they're actually following. And then from there, now you can start connecting the dots of where they're hanging out, but also like what Instagram accounts, what TikTok accounts, et cetera, they might be following in social.
And then I'd like to lean into this a little bit, and James, we'll get to your question in just a sec here. But when you find somebody, like when you're like, okay, they look like a good fit, can you walk us through the outreach process that you like to take?
So outreach process for affiliate influencers, right?
Yeah, like when you find somebody, let's say they're like a smaller, like kind of mid-level, let's say you're starting out, you don't want to go for someone too big yet. How do you, okay, you've identified them, they seem like a good fit. How do you start that outreach? Are you sliding into their DMs? Like, how do you kind of do that?
Good question. What I've done is I'll try where I think they're going to be most active. So let's say that I find somebody who's got an audience of like 60,000 people on Instagram. They got a blog that looks well trafficked. I'm gonna find like their Instagram, for example, should I DM them or should I email them directly? I usually default to email. I know that others have a lot of success DMing, and I would say like one good thing to keep in mind if you are going to look into diving into this world, you want somebody in your team that genuinely loves social media. I am not that person. I am not the guy that's going to live on Instagram looking at everybody's cool content, pictures of their dogs and their six packs and stuff. That's really not what I really enjoy doing. However, if you have somebody in your team, maybe they're millennial, maybe they're Gen Z, or that just loves that stuff, get them to play a role in the influencer world, because number one, they're going to be excited and motivated about reaching out to people, and number two, it's going to feel like play to them. We have folks in our team that are so good at Instagram because that's what they love. That's where they love to be to consume content. So, just a little side note because it does play a part into the reach out. So I default to email. But the nice thing is that if you find someone and find where they're living, like what platforms they're on, there are various mechanics, they're really easy techniques to find their content and contact information. Most influencers will have either their agency listed in their description, their bio for business deals and stuff, or they'll have, if you use their mobile app versus like desktop, which I think anybody's going to use the mobile app. There is usually a button to click to contact, and they'll have an email address under that. If you don't find one there, because not everybody lists it, and they have a YouTube channel, even if they only have like 5,000 people, if you look at the About section on YouTube, so if you go to their page, you go to their homepage on YouTube, there's an About tab. You click on the About tab, there's a For Business Inquiries field, and you can grab their email address from there. If you don't have their email, you want to reach out social, DM them directly. And I'll say Tony Casandrinos of Casandrinos Olive Oil. I think I mentioned this before when I was talking to Kyle Kostechka. He does a great job with personal reach outs, DMs, and Instagram. He connects with them right away. He had his own little formula of like reaching out to them in a DM, and then when they post something, he'll at them in their post and say, "Hey, check your DMs." And he's had some great experience connecting with influencers to build his brand through those channels. So that's a great way to go about it. And then it's all about refining that cold reach out email, which I have spent some time kind of refining and seeing what works there.
Yeah, no, do you have any like little hacks you like to use for your cold outreach that you mind sharing?
Yeah, a really easy call to action, like or more like a reply. So rather than saying, "Hey, want to work together?" It's more of, "Can I send you some free product?" Like that's the easiest way, especially if it's something that you know they're gonna love. I mean, I benefit from the fact that Organifi isn't just like a bunch of pills, and yeah, you might feel great about it. It might help you, it might not. But even if you don't feel like these amazing benefits, generally speaking, our products taste pretty good, and so that helps us kind of get in the door. Like people get excited about that, and I'll add that brand plays a role in that too. If you can position yourself looking like a brand that cares about something, like what is your purpose, you have this brand credibility, so to speak, then that's going to help people getting back to you rather than like, yeah, I don't really want to talk to that. So it does play a role there.
Totally. No, then gosh, when I was working at Page One Power, I had to do outreach every day, all day to webmasters and bloggers, trying to get them to do me a favor, essentially, right? Put a link up on the client's site, put a post I wrote up on their blog with no real benefit to them. What's that?
How would you get them to respond?
Well, that's what, like, I would look at it and go, kind of what you did, right? I try to add value to them because, gosh, it took a lot of no's to figure this out. But if I could go through their site and find something broken on it, right, I'd reach out to them. That'd be like my first thing. Like, hey, saw that this link isn't working on your site, XYZ thing, or this page doesn't work, or something doesn't load. Like, you need to fix this. Not like accusatory, just like that you want to know. And by the way, like, would love to chat with you about XYZ type thing, right? Would love to write a blog post about something really specific. Give them a very easy yes or no. Maybe do a few like other ideas if I think that one's maybe a maybe. And that just kind of helped them, oh, wow, thank you. First of all, I've added value to you.
Oh, yeah.
And then it give them a very clear, yes, I want that kind of answer. Not like what are you asking me for? So it gives you like a very clear kind of thing to do. I think for any kind of cold outreach, they need some sort of, like you said, clear call to action with value add. And I love that you're just getting the foot in the door. Hey, can I send you a product, right? Can you try it out? And yes, they probably know you're going to pitch them about something next, but they're going to get something cool out of it. You have a good looking brand and you can kind of move forward from there.
Yeah, 100%. I love that, Thomas, because it's providing that value, as we always talk about, I think, in this world of relationships, providing value before you even ask for anything. I did learn that asking somebody for their address versus asking like, what address can I send this to? Like, try to be as far away from invasive as you possibly can to get them to respond. So like,
Don't be
is
super
there a good
creepy.
address I can send this to, rather than saying, tell me your home address right now. Like, can't send this to you. So that was just a tiny little nuance that I noticed, that people respond better when you're not asking them for like their private information, but just asking, where can I send this? It may not be your home address, maybe somewhere else, but where can I send it for you? And then I wanted to play a little bit off of what you said, Thomas, because I think that's spot on. Like, spending the time to look at what they're doing is a big deal. And if you can add value, like you were able to at Page Power, it's great. Working with an influencer, finding common ground to somebody. Favorite sports teams is like a big deal. Like, if they're wearing some memorabilia and reaching out, like, hey man, I hate the Patriots, I'm a Dolphins fan, screw you guys, but anyway, let's talk about business. Like, it immediately breaks down that barrier of awkwardness, and like, hey, we actually have something in common. And that's helped me a ton as well. Knowing what people are going through. The nice thing about Instagram and social media is that people do share about their lives. And so, to show that you're actually doing your research, not just reaching out cold, look and see what they're doing in their lives, or tell them what you really what you really appreciated about their content. I think with influencers, especially, they want to know that what they're creating has resonance. And generally speaking, anybody established is going to know that. But if you can tell them, hey, I really loved your post about like self-acceptance, or your battle with Lyme disease, or whatever that is, like that means a lot when they know that you're listening.
Does Organifi ever like proactively share content of other people to try to like kind of warm those waters up for maybe a bigger influencer?
Yes, we do. Yeah, that's a great comment and question, Thomas, because it's something we do a lot. Um, for me, I've kind of used it as, if I can get my foot in the door and they're talking to me, and it's kind of like it's a lever that I can pull to get someone to drive more value to our end. The nice thing about social, and when you start establishing your social brands, none of those levers are big. Like, I'm going to send your offer to my email list. And granted, anybody who does recips, like that's a game changer in the influencer world. Like, if you're willing to recip for them, nobody does that. We don't do it, and so I can never use that as like a carrot to dangle in front of them. But if you have an email list and you're willing to promote their course, or just like send to their hero content or whatever it is, if you can promote them and send them 1,200 clicks, that's going to be huge for them. So something we don't do that you could definitely do to kind of build an advantage. But what we'll do is we'll leverage we have a Facebook group of about 8,000 customers. And so we'll bring people in to provide content in there, and then let them, share what they're working on. Or we'll do an Instagram, we'll share one of their posts, or one of their stories, or we will do an Instagram live with them. So various different levers that you can pull to establish the brand, the audience, and provide value to them.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Then jump into a question from James. Do you stay away from influencers that pimp different products every day?
Yes. Somebody had a question earlier that this was brought to mind. When you're looking at like, who do you know, who to work with? How do you find out who to work with? And if they're going to be a success? Yes, but not exclusively, James. Which is crazy, because usually if you have somebody who's pitching, like every other post is a product pitch, usually it's a red flag. But don't rule it out, because on occasion they're just really good at selling. We've had influencers that'll drive crazy volume because people look to them to buy. I can't think of any off the top of my head. If I would, I'd share. But yeah, we've run across some that it seems like all they're doing is selling, and yet it works every time.
I guess the right one-to-one correlation there would be a direct response marketer mailing their list 4 to 5 times a day, right?
Yeah, 100%. There's probably something you could do, James, to maybe filter out the bad ones. Is look if they're being at least consistent with their messaging. This is something that just came to my head. So I'm trying to teach myself as I'm sharing this with you. Yes, they may be pitching all the time, but are they at least consistent with their messaging, or are they just shilling out anything they come across? If they're sticking to their core message or their brand, then there's probably some validity there.
Oh, that's a really good disclaimer there. Yeah. And then going into a question from Kenneth, what kind of landing pages do you like to send influencer traffic to? Is it just kind of standard ones you have, long form, custom ones for bigger influencers? Can you talk about that strategy a bit?
Yeah, and I might share a little bit more about landing pages in general for Organifi, but we don't use a lot of landing pages, especially with influencers. More often than not, we're running them to a standard product page on Shopify. So product at the top with their buying options, a little bit of copy and content below it, and that's really it. That doesn't mean it's the best way to do it, but it does work for us, which is kind of shocking. Coming from the world of direct response, just like you, Thomas. Like I I run in the world of landing pages and optimizing and testing and whatnot. And so we still do landing pages with a lot of our affiliates. With influencers, not a whole lot. What we have seen work really well with podcast influencers and some emailers is running traffic to a branded page. And there's a lot of really cool brands that do this. Elemental Labs is one that just they're killing it. Athletic Greens does it pretty well too, where they'll have a landing page with an offer. And for them, I think it makes a lot more sense in Organifi because they have like one main hero product rather than being diversified through a bunch of products like Organifi is, where they have a landing page with an offer that I'm sure they've tested to some degree or another, and they have the personal branding with that influencer at the top, maybe with a testimonial or an experience. And that works really well if you have the resources to devote to that. We've been able to get significantly positive ROAS on just running to PDPs, product pages, maybe with some customization. Like I'll actually share an example here. Let me just add. I'll give you one example here in the chat box. There it is. So that is Ben Greenfield's landing page.
Oh, thank you.
You'll take a look at it. You'll see that there's really not much to it. It's got our product listings, and above that is a big picture of Handsome Ben. Everybody loves Handsome Ben.
Super simple little discount code that I assume he uses in his promos for it, right? That you restate it there, hero image, banner image for him, and then just your products.
Yeah, and that's pretty much it. The nice thing is that with the world of direct response, you're doing a lot of the convincing and the selling on your sales pages. In the world of influencers, they're doing the selling for you.
So you're trying to just get out of the way and let that warm traffic.
Yeah, just let them know. Like you send that message to the person landing on the page. You're like, hey, this is our buddy Ben. You know, this is our buddy. We like him. He likes us. Buy our stuff. Like you don't have to go through the entire sales pitch to get him to click.
I would have assumed to do something totally different. So this is very helpful for me.
and that may also work too. Like that's the thing is like this is just our own experience so far at Organifi.
And so with a lot, like what is the most common type of influencer post you're getting? Is it like a swipe up story, an Instagram post, like a link in bio, a blog post? Like what's like the most common one that you're kind of experiencing and getting traction with?
Yeah, great question. And before I answer that, I'll add in here an example of another. I mentioned Elemental Labs, Element. That is more of like a traditional like e-commerce landing page to check out what they do really well with influencers. To answer your question, though, Thomas, we have seen the most success, probably number one, Instagram stories. So 24-hour video reels. And those, the nice thing is that, especially if you're coming from direct response, you can very easily track the return on those because they include a swipe up link. So if anybody's watching and they're going to take the call to action, they're swiping up. And you can track all those and know exactly what revenue you're getting from that. Whereas the world of podcasts, which is probably more lucrative and profitable for us, if I were to include that in this conversation, you can't track it nearly as well. You can track it based on like coupon code, for example. But I love stories because it is so directly tied to, like the content is directly tied to the results.
I see. It's direct swipe up campaign kind of thing, and then they're on the page.
Yep, you got it. And especially with promos that are time sensitive, because stories are time sensitive too. They're 24-hour videos on Instagram, then they go away forever. So yes, being able to leverage time sensitive promos through Instagram stories is great. I'll also mention that Instagram posts, while generally aren't solid revenue drivers from my experience, long tail benefit is huge because that content exists forever and is a great value add to the brand itself because you're working with a partner that is adding value by recommending you, and it's going to exist there for forever.
Gotcha.
And I'll add one more. We're now branching into like email and the influencer side a lot more. So rather than just the direct response world of email or newsletters, any savvy influencer, as I mentioned before, is going to have multiple channels, and email is becoming a much more significant channel for us. And I would say it's probably because influencers are getting smarter about it. Primarily because companies like Morning Brew and The Hustle and 1440, these major newsletters are kind of making email cool again, so to speak. Millennials and Gen Zers are opening up their inbox to check these cool newsletters, and similarly, like influencers are building their own newsletters. Wellness Mom is a great example of an influencer that just dominates email.
So you're actually negotiating sends to an influencer's email list, not just like their social stories.
Yeah. Well,
Gotcha.
depending on like who we're working with, like every deal is kind of custom. Like we try to unify it as much as possible, so we're doing less work. However, sometimes we can work email straight commission, but we need to pay flat rate for podcast. Ideally, we do a flat rate for everything or commission for everything, but oftentimes we come into these hybrid deals. It works pretty well, so there's no real complaint there. More of just it's a little more tedious to do that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then Chelsea had a question here. Are there certain perks that you found motivate influencers to run your offer versus other similar offers, other than having good relationship and trust established? Which I might be cheating with that asterisk there, but so that's probably is the best way. But yeah.
Yeah, we'll just that's the default best way. That's good. Perks, yeah. So we've done bonuses here and there. For anybody who is used to the world of direct response affiliates, running contests, you're paying like $10,000 prizes for the top earners. You can go to the world of influencers and $1,000 be the top prize. Like there's a much different expectation working with influencers that $1,000 is going to motivate them versus a $10,000 prize package, which is great for the entrepreneur, for the business owner. And I'm sure over time that'll get diluted and we'll be back to $10,000 bonuses in the influencer world. But I will also add that we've seen experience giving kind of these thresholds for higher commissions or time. I don't know if we've done timed commissions, but we've also worked into some agreements where if you hit certain thresholds every month, then we'll pay out a higher commission percentage to you. That generally works really well, especially because for the most part, uh, we were talking. You alluded earlier to emailers mailing their list 5 times a day. Instagrammers can, if they have a good relationship with their audience, they can pump without really damaging their rapport, and they still get good engagement. So top influencers can drive like $50,000-$60,000 a month. Like it's pretty nuts. So being able to broker a deal where you're setting up thresholds for higher commissions has worked pretty well for us.
I love that. I try to coach my clients to build in that kind of stuff when they're negotiating with affiliates,
Nice.
right? It's like, so it's a really good one-to-one comparison there with, yeah, if you send like, oh, yeah, because what affiliates always ask, like, hey, can I get more commission? And the default is, oh, yeah, sure, because you don't want to lose the traffic. But you might as well tie that to something specific. Like, sure, I can give you more commission if you can hit X goal, right, on a
Yep.
monthly basis. And then if you don't, we'll drop you back down, right? You kind of put some, not a stick, right, but a carrot in front of it to kind of motivate that continued source of traffic.
Yeah, 100%, Thomas.
Do you, going to that a bit more too, like when you go deeper versus wider with these influencers, which is kind of what I think you're alluding to there, right? You can get like sustained traffic from some of these big ones. What are some other ways you kind of build that in to make it mutually beneficial?
Ooh, as I mentioned with like multiple channels, if you can work with a partner on all their channels, it establishes like the return is generally greater than any one singular channel. And so I'll give you one example. We tested a partner um, on a podcast, and it did not do well. But everything aligned, like everything made sense, like their age demographic, their content, it all seemed to align really well with what we were doing as a company. And so we decided to test them again, but this time we threw in email as well. Like, let's do podcast, but let's also include a couple of emails, see how this does. And while the podcast didn't do that much better, it did a little better, but not much. The email was like a 10-to-1 return on the overall spend. Like it was wild. And so I'd tell them like, hey, by the way, I think you're devaluing your email list. Um, but that to me was like evidence that the deeper you go, the more golden nuggets you're going to find. So as you work with them more, that's going to happen. They're going to get more committed to your brand. They'll probably ask for more, as they should. I mean, why not? Like we had one. We've recently learned of a brand who's offered like because they're more of a startup. Rather, we've been around for a while. They're offering equity to top influencers. Like that's insane to me. But
That does sound insane.
super savvy. I mean, if
Yeah.
you want to go from 0 to $10 million, go find 3 of the top influencers in the wellness space and offer them equity. Like that to me is like that's a business hack right there. If you're willing to shell that out. Aside from that, we've learned that if people would love to white label with us, people would love to launch a brand
Mm.
or not a brand but a product with us. While that isn't something we're at the point of entertaining yet, it's something that we would discuss depending on the partner. And then it's also the opportunity, like as you go deeper with a partner, um, you get these, like, I would say, like almost intangible benefits from them. They're still tangible. I mean, for example, Ben Greenfield, we'll go back to him. He's a great example. Featured us in his book. I mean, everybody knows athletic greens from either at Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss, it seems.
Right.
And one of the earliest proponents of athletic greens is Tim Ferriss, and he included athletic greens in 4 hour work week, I think, if not 4 hour body for sure. And I don't know how much sales he's driven that has never been tracked, but he sure drove a ton of sales from that. So those kinds of benefits you get because you have that integration with partners at a much deeper level than just at a horizontal kind of surface level.
I love that. Yeah, I think it just shows to the surprise and delight benefits you might get from working with influencers, kind of that with someone who has their own brand that's out there and partnering with them. You really know that evergreen content that can come out from there is super leverageable.
Oh,
but
yeah.
probably not, like you said, it's probably that dark funnel, right? You can't really track it all the time, but you're going to see a rising tide happening the more you do it.
Yeah, 100%. And as you branch out into more channels for your business, not just influencers, but just in general, like as you're scaling Facebook ad campaigns, if you have an integrated partner, you can leverage their content and partner with them to run the UGC type ads that work really well, running from their ad account or their Facebook page or Instagram page or account. You can work with them to run campaigns if you're launching like a small retail channel. Work with them to drive content to that retail channel, for example. So there's a lot of cool opportunities out there once you do integrate yourself, like you're saying, Thomas.
I like that. And then here's a good one from James. Do you stay away from influencers that are overtly political or polarizing?
Ah, man.
I'd have to guess that's a pretty brand specific question, right? But I guess for you, like, is that something that comes into your mind when you're looking at their content?
That's a great answer, Thomas. I would say, like, is that a part of your brand identity? Like for Organifi, we're run by a bunch of millennials. Like that's what we are. You know, we have very few people over the age of 40. As much as it'd be cool to have more inclusivity, it's just everybody's young. You know, with that in mind, you know, it kind of seems that we align with the mainstream movement to stay on brand with our audience. Sorry, James. That was.
Well, it makes sense, right? If you're selling gun holsters, right? I imagine your target
You want to
audience
be
will align
polarizing.
very.
Yeah.
You'd probably have a very different type of target audience, and different types of influencers in that audience that align different ways.
Yeah. And I think your goal, I don't think, I know your goal as a brand is to alienate some people. Like, generally speaking, you're not going to be selling to everyone. I mean, one of the biggest businesses on the planet, Walmart, alienates a ton of people. Like, I never shop at Walmart. I don't want to shop at Walmart. Because they don't want me to buy there. They want the millions of other people that aren't me that are going to buy from there. So yeah, I think to answer your question a little bit more, James, I think no matter what, you're going to be a little polarizing and take a stance, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're like, you want to work with the influencers that are drawing attention to it, because if they're a loose cannon, then they might step off their platform to go after something else that could tarnish what you're building.
True. Well, I think you mentioned this in another podcast I heard you on, was like brand compliance almost, right? So it's almost like really knowing what is your brand about. This is not so much compliance, right? But like, what is your brand about? What are your core mission statements, if you want to call it that, right? And does this influencer, is this going to support or detract from that? Right. You're going to say yes to everything, or you're going to say no to some things because it doesn't, and it does detract to your brand identity. And that's might be where that conversation happens.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Thomas. From my background in the world of direct response, if you see a lot of traffic, that means dollars, and you don't necessarily care. Your goal is to get it to perform, not necessarily like political stances and whether it aligns with your brand. It's an offer, you know, it's not a brand, it's an offer. And so you don't necessarily care about brand compliance. When you get into the brand world, then it matters a lot more. So 100%, dude.
I'm going to pivot a little bit here. Can you draw the parallels? In my head, we've been talking a lot about kind of like social media influencers, wellness bloggers, things like that. Like, and we've mentioned some podcasts, but can you draw maybe a more one-to-one parallel with how you approach podcasts and kind of how you've leveraged those? Because I know it's similar, but to me, it's different than going after like a social media influencer.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Thomas. It is different. There's from my experience anyway, the way that the two operate are a bit different. Podcasts, from my experience, have been a lot more they're much more structured from a business perspective. They have metrics that they're tied to, whereas social media influencers generally don't know their metrics, nor do they really care. They probably care about engagement rate and followers, and that's really all they need probably to keep their business a success. And I think any social media expert is going to be able to tell you a lot more than I can. So I'm making some assumptions here. However, from a podcast perspective, they're a media channel, and so they're going to operate more like a media business rather than a social media influencer, which is a personal brand. And so because they're a media entity, they're looking at CPMs, for example, which is a very familiar acronym for business in the world of direct response. So that's a nice kind of translation when you look at podcasts, and it's really not that different from how you approach email buys, for example. So when you approach a podcaster, more often than not, podcasters are a lot easier to reach, from my experience again, than social media experts, because as long as there's some alignment with what your product is and what their messaging is on their podcast, you're going to be the one paying them. There's really no risk on their part other than a risk of a long-term deal. You're going to be giving them a flat rate, I would say like 49 times out of 50. Like it's pretty common. It's very, very uncommon to score like a rev share deal with a podcast.
Okay.
So with that in mind, you're going to be approaching them, and they're going to give you their media kit, because more often than not, they're going to have a media kit with their monthly downloads or their downloads per episode. They might already have like an established CPM price or a package deals based on the number of podcast episodes you want to purchase from them. So it's very much more of like a negotiation of the business than working with an influencer, like a one-off individual.
That makes sense. And then, so when you say a flat rate, is that almost like on a per podcast basis? Is it like a package of episodes that you're kind of purchasing ad spots across? How are those laid out?
Yeah, what we generally do is it's a price per episode based on the volume. So you can get volume pricing, so to speak. If you're gonna, like, if you want to start testing with somebody, you don't want to go out the door with 16 episodes per se. You probably want to go out the door with like 4 to 8 maybe, depending on how willing you are to commit to that. And at that point, if you're just going to test 2 or 3, you might be paying $1,000 for an episode. If you're going to test 8 to 10, you might get that down to $600 an episode. So it really depends on your negotiation. And that's the thing, is like podcast partners are open to negotiation if it's the right fit.
Sure. I mean, you hear the ones pushing, Casper mattresses with a discount code. I imagine they're getting kickbacks for every mattress they're selling and stuff, right? But sorry, where was I going to go with that? I was curious with the podcasting. Are you tracking that based on a unique URL that you're calling out, like in the CTA of the ad?
You can, and we do to a degree. The easiest metric that we are able to track, and it's not 100% trackable, but it's still pretty close, is coupon code purchases. So you saw Ben Greenfield's landing page, Organifi.com/Ben. He's got I think it's Ben G20 is his coupon code. So we track, and that's what we measure for ROAS, the revenue coming from them. With that in mind, there are a couple things to keep in mind. Number one, coupon code sites will grab those and run, and they're going to run them as long as they can. Depending on
that's probably a bad thing, right?
It's kind of a bad thing. Yeah, we've had partners in the past where it's like, hey, guess what? You did like $40,000 this month. Last month you only did like $8,000. This is kind of weird. But it's because like, oh, it got picked up by Retail Me Not or Honey, and they ran with it, and there's all these sales. So
how do you accommodate for that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and
I wish I knew.
Not an easy one to answer. We have had success, and I've heard other people not having success of getting your coupon codes removed from those sites. For example, Honey, I think if you use Honey on Organifi Shop, you don't see any coupon codes. I'm pretty sure they're all delisted. Not the case on Retail Me Not. What you can keep in mind, if you want to open up another affiliate channel on like Rakuten or Share Sale on AWIN or something, you can set up a program just for coupon sites, or work with an agency to do that, and give them their own coupon code so they can get their little 8% commission bump, and then you don't have to worry about them promoting these other coupon codes. That is one way to approach it. We have not done that. We've entertained it and never committed to it, but I have heard it happening.
So you almost just like understand it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Let them get a piece, but not the whole piece that they might have gotten. Okay.
Exactly. You can have a bite of the pie, but not the whole slice. The other thing to keep in mind is that, and a great expert on this, if you know Ari Klassenfeld, I want to say, I probably pronounced that wrong, but he used to run podcast for Four Sigmatic and partnerships. And the dude he's a savant with that stuff. Ari is a huge believer in that the metrics that you track for ROAS for podcast is maybe like 60% of the true return you're getting from it. And if you are able to transparently look at, like, if there's a way to have a lens on how podcast traffic flows, how many of them go to Amazon when they hear about you and check you out on
Right.
Amazon?
Yeah.
I can't imagine, like, there's a sizable number that goes to Amazon. Then there's those who just go to Google and search you, and then maybe forget to put in the coupon code or find another coupon code they think is better. So yes, podcast measurements, like, you want to attribute ROAS, and you can still get a really high ROAS for podcast partners, but keep in mind that, the rising tide raises all ships. Like, you bring in that traffic is not just going to that landing page for that partner. It's going to your other, platforms as well.
I love that. And I think it's going to get more and more common as, right, Facebook and Apple keep fighting and tracking gets harder across even just true direct response campaigns. You're going to see that happen more and more across the board, where the dark funnel, for lack of a better term, where you don't necessarily know where people are coming from to get to your site. It's that kind of podcast, the organic content you put out, the influencer stuff you're doing, the email campaigns you're doing, all of those things are going to lead to a better sales structure and more revenue coming in the door, right? And that's kind of, it might be one of the things, like, we know this is working, we don't know how it's working. I've heard of some brands doing basically question campaigns on a purchase, right? Like, hey, thanks for your order, how'd you hear about us? And that's how they're reattributing back, because it's like, it might look like it came from your Facebook campaign, but really it's like, oh, I heard you on this Joe Rogan podcast or whatever it might be, right? And it's like, so that they're able to, like, retroactively apply tracking to the customers they're getting, because they don't know or what they do know isn't accurate.
Yeah, and I know that I just purchased some Magic Spoon cereal, and they do just that. Like, they ask you on that confirmation page, like, hey, how'd you hear about us? Is it effective? Probably to a degree. I'm pretty sure I answered that question correctly, but I've also heard about them, 15 other times, so I don't really know how accurate that is. But it's a great point. Like, being able to retroactively track at least gives you another data point to suggest that, yes, podcasts are working in the way that we were expecting them to work.
Yeah. And this is totally anecdotal, but I've heard of other people going, yeah, like, right. Oh yeah. When we were doing podcasts, like, the direct return on them were terrible, or like replace it with influencers, but our Facebook ads are doing way better. Right. And it's like, whatever it might be, or organic search is way up. You see that happen with affiliate blasts too. Like, oh man, like, yeah, this affiliate didn't do well, but man, our Amazon sales went way up. It's like, probably related, right? I want to spiff that person a little bit. Yeah.
Yep. 100% agree.
Well, sweet. Well, I think we're kind of close to wrapping up here with my questions. If anyone else has any, please drop them in. But Josh, I wanted to ask you, what are some things you wish you knew when you were starting out that you would coach someone to be mindful of if they're getting into this influencer / podcast space? Anything you might have put your foot in, or like, oh, it could be outreach, could be whatever it might be. We're just like, whoops, not going to do that again.
Avoid agencies at all costs in the beginning.
Oh, I was like, what?
In the beginning. Eventually it makes sense. So I'll go a little story. So there is a guy on Instagram. What is his name? Nash Greer. Nash Greer is like a 20-year-old. He was huge. I want to say he was huge on Vine back in the day.
Okay.
I think he has like 8 or 10 million followers, something like that. So he's a big deal, but he's a big deal for the youngins, the little 20-year-old kids. He's built up his little social media brand, and he freaking loves Organifi. The dude loves green juice. And we got really excited. He reached out, said, hey, I want to do some stuff with you guys. Like, that sounds great. So he introduced us to his agency. Now, to be fair, like, their agency was great. Like, they were so cool to work with. Not a lot of agencies are, but they were very willing to, like, help support. If we didn't meet metrics, then they're willing to help. So I will give the caveat that the good agencies will still help you. And this may also be more of a warning sign to just don't work with big influencers from the start, rather than agencies being the concern. So we did like an Instagram stories, a handful of stories with him. We paid him, like, they asked for, like, I want to say 30 grand, like something ridiculous. We're like, how about like 4 or 5 grand? Maybe that, and I ultimately, we did a few different stories. We might have paid him like 8 or 10 grand for like a handful of assets for them to deliver. Nothing. Like, we got like a basket full of sales, like nothing crazy. And it was it sucked because we were, as a company, we're like, this is huge. Like, this guy's all over the place. And yeah, he's not like the best fit from like a demographic perspective, but we got such a good discount. Like, we talked to him and said, hey, we want to work with you because you love our brand. We love you, but it's not the best fit. So let's like do 20% of what you're asking for. And it still didn't work. So that's like, I was so hopeful, like we can negotiate them down so low that no matter what, at least we'll break even. And we weren't even close.
It's a
So
little bit terrible.
so like we're getting an agency, like they're going to tack on fees, so that increases your odds of not succeeding. Uh, Working with big influencers increases your risk rather than working with smaller influencers who have a greater, lower ceiling but a higher potential or a higher upside, I'd say, higher probability, I guess, for success. So starting out there is great. As a company, we've done that well because we have what's called the collective program, and that focused on smaller tiered influencers until we moved into bigger ones. But strictly from a paid standpoint, start with mid-tier small guys, go from there. The other thing I'll mention is like it is a numbers game. Um, don't don't marry yourself to like a specific influencer. Like, understand that it is, even though relationships matter, the brand matters, it is still a numbers game. You can't work with everybody unless it really drives the ROAS you want. Have your goals in place. Don't like understand like what success looks like, because if you just go into it without those defined, then you're gonna settle. So know what success looks like. Have like your stretch goals. Have your like at all costs hit this, as far as like what you're willing to spend and what you're willing or what you want to see as far as ROAS goes. And then just hold yourself to like don't commit short term, commit long term. Understand that it's going to be, you're not going to hit the first 10 maybe, but since it is a numbers game, over the next 3 to 6 months you'll start seeing some success if you don't see it right away.
I love that. Do you recommend someone like use their affiliate manager kind of going into that role? I know that was kind of your route a little bit. Like, or like, is there something that they should take on themselves first? Like, how should that hiring process go if they're looking to get into this?
Yeah, good
Or that
question.
role. The role.
Yeah, the role. I love the idea of hiring, like I mentioned earlier, somebody who does live and breathe social media. Somebody who has a performance background is helpful. Not necessarily needed if you have the ability to get involved in the numbers and keeping an eye on the metrics. So whoever you find, I'd say they need these two traits. Unless you're doing it yourself, you need to at least enjoy being on social media and working in social media, looking at what's working, etc. And the number two, someone who will follow through with some kind of like performance KPIs. It doesn't need to be like revenue per se, but are they going to reach out to 10 people a day? Are they willing to commit to filling out a spreadsheet and tracking things? Because I think it's fairly rare to get both of those in the same package. You're going to get someone who's very procedural, who is like dedicated to filling out spreadsheets, and you get somebody who is like a little more loosey goosey and loves the relationship side and the content side, but may not commit to the spreadsheets. They don't need to be the same person. I know Amber Spears talks a ton about hunters versus farmers, and that kind of a mentality is very similar. If you don't have them in one person, have them in two different roles. So you have a main person doing the reach out, and then somebody in a supporting role, making sure that they're working together to track everything.
That makes sense. I imagine if you have someone in that supporting role ready for an affiliate campaign, for example, that could easily, maybe not easily, right, but they could dovetail into that if you have someone else on the influencer side. So,
yep. And I would just recommend making sure that you are, as a business owner, being mindful of the fact that, hey, they're stepping into something new, and making sure they get the proper time carved out rather than just having to add another 15 to 20 hours of work to their week. Making sure they have the time to carve out specifically to it.
Oh my gosh, I'm sure you can list too how many people list off, oh, this thing doesn't work. And it's like, well, did you try? Like, I tried like 2 things. And
yeah.
Okay.
Give some leeway to
Oh my gosh, that's so true. So I would ask you this, Josh, what can people do to support you? Because I know this, right? Your role is you're not an agency doing this or anything, right? You're working in-house at Organifi. So other than buying 6 bottles of Organifi right after this call, what can people do to support you and sharing after you shared all this knowledge with us?
Let me give you my coupon code. Then you can run to your nearest
Josh 20.
Yeah. No coupon codes for me. I'm kind of an open book. I don't have any asks per se, other than reach out and say hello. I love meeting people. Working remote, as I'm sure many of you extroverts and maybe some introverts can feel, kind of sucks sometimes. not being in the office. And Thomas, I can 100% relate to being able to hang out with you at the ClickBank offices of yesteryear and really enjoying that environment. So yeah, shoot me a message, say, hey, like that means the world to me, and let me know if it was helpful. If this is something I should do a lot more. I'd love to know if that's the case. So send good feedback to me, and that's really all I'll ask for. Let me know if this is good stuff.
I love that. Thanks, man. And I'll get you some macaroons since you can come in person. I'll get the cable mic. We can do it in person next time. But awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone that jumped on. This was it means a lot to me that people came to watch this, and we'll do some more of these down the road. Josh, thank you so much for your time. I'll be sure to get the links from you from all this other stuff we're chatting about. So we can put it in the show notes and all that kind of good stuff.
Great.
Yeah. And happy scaling, everybody. Cheers.
Thanks all.